everyone. Michelle Mays here, and I have a special treat for you all today. Today, I have Kate Anthony here with me, and Kate is the author of The D Word, Making the Ultimate Decision About Your Marriage. She is also the host of the critically acclaimed New York Times recommended podcast, The Divorce Survival Guide podcast, and the creator of the groundbreaking online coaching program, Should I Stay or Should I Go? And that helps women make the most difficult decision of their lives using coaching tools, relationship education, geeky neuroscience, community support, and deep self-work. So Kate is certified as a domestic violence advocate, a co-parenting specialist, and a high conflict divorce coach. So you might get from all of that, we're going to be talking about divorce today. But this is going to be the topic of the day and the topic of our conversation. And we're really glad to have Kate here. Her book just launched. And so for those of you who are divorced, in the process of divorcing, or thinking about it, or, even hoping that your relationship is going to survive and move forward and repair, but that there's that possibility, this conversation we'll have a little bit of something for everybody, hopefully, regardless of where you're at. So Kate, welcome.
Thank you so much thank you for having me, Michelle. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah. So let's start here. Why this book? I know you've had the podcast, you've had the coaching program. What made you decide I'm going to write this book and put this out in the world too?
I mean, it was honestly people telling me. It was like, all the people were like, when are you going to write a book? When are you going to write a book? And then I was like, okay, I guess I have to write a book. No, I mean, partly that, and partly that after doing the work that I've been doing for the last 10 years, it just seemed I wanted to gather all of the information that, similar to you, right? When you have a community and you hear the same questions over and over again, and people are going through what they're going through, it's the first time for them. But when you're sitting in the chair that we sit in, you hear the same things over and over again. And there is so much information and there's so many considerations that I know that everybody needs. And so I wanted to provide it in just this other, medium, really.
That's great. And I think you have done that. It's interesting looking at the book because I think of marriage and I think of divorce. It's on a continuum, right? From great marriages to really awful, toxic marriages. And divorce is on that same continuum from a marriage that's just not doing great to a really terrible marriage. And I think you've parsed some really difficult issues in your book. You've really looked at some different nuanced things. So we're going to talk about that as we go along today.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I'm glad to hear you say that. So thank you.
Yeah, no,
I mean, that's what I tried to do. So
in a really needed way. Yeah. So I want to read a quote from your introduction though to start, because I really loved this quote.
Okay.
And I wanted to hear your thoughts about it. I'm going to start in the middle of a sentence, but you said, what I really had, you were talking about yourself. So what I really had was a marriage devoid of truth, love, mutual respect, and substance. And the longer I remained in such a marriage, the more devoid of truth, self-love, self-respect, and substance I became. So can you talk a little bit about that? Just that
so
such a great quote, but yeah, so meaty, really.
Right. I mean, when it's the air that you breathe, right? When you're breathing toxic air, it toxifies you, right? I mean, at its most basic. But I think more, in a more complex way, it's, I felt like I was kind of, I felt like I was a strong, powerful woman, right? Inside, I felt like that's actually who I was, right? In my core, in my my highest self. I knew that person was in there. It was not the person I was being in this marriage. It wasn't the person I was allowed to be in this marriage. And so the longer I was in it, the less of my true self I became. And I think there's a duality in it. There's the what I'm being told,
Mm-hmm.
the message I was receiving day in and day out, which is that I wasn't good enough. I wasn't, skinny enough. I didn't have the right body. I didn't have the right, I wasn't funny enough. I wasn't smart enough. Like all of the messages that I was getting day in and day out. And when you actively choose to remain
Mm-hmm.
in a relationship with someone who feels that way about you, you kind of necessarily have to believe that about yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm choosing this relationship day in and day out. So therefore, this is the truth I'm buying into,
Mm-hmm.
which is the opposite of
Mm-hmm.
my truth. And yet I prioritized,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I think it's more complex, of course, than I prioritized what he thought about me over what I thought about me, because obviously I fought against it every single day.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a difference between and this is the hardest thing in the world, right? And I don't mean to oversimplify it by any stretch, but it is very different to say, you can't talk to me like that, or, why are you saying such horrible things about me? Between that and saying, what you're saying about me is so wrong that I no longer choose to actually be in this relationship,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the leap from there, from one to the other, is enormous, enormous. And there is sort of this catch-22 of like, you need to develop that strength and root yourself into your true and authentic self in order to really recognize that what this person is saying about you um, is not true,
Mm-hmm.
and that you're greater than this, um, while also experiencing it.
Yeah, it's what it's bringing up for me as I'm listening to you is what I see happen for some of my clients is almost this. I see them say, regardless of what my partner's doing, I'm getting healthy.
Yes.
And I always think yes and no.
Right. That's
I
right.
have this dual reaction to it because I think, okay, yes, I love your planting your flag that you're going to really work on yourself and getting healthy yourself, because that is necessary. But along with that is sometimes this idea of like, but I can stay in this very sideways relationship that's full
Yes.
of unhealthy dynamics and somehow be separate from that and healthy myself.
Hmm.
And I think you're putting your finger
Yes.
the way it impacts us.
Yes, absolutely. And I see this, and I talk about this actually in the chapter on alcoholism and addiction, right? And that, like, alcohol addiction and mental illness, right? That we are told in, like, 12-step programs, in Al-Anon and in Codependence Anonymous, those programs, that like we can have a full life, whether the alcoholic is drinking or not, whether the addict is using or not, whether the, person with mental illness is getting treatment or not. And I guess I sort of push back on that, because I mean, you can, right? But are you actually having the relationship that you want with them?
Mm-hmm.
Right? You can continue to be married to them, but you are going to have a very separate life. You are going to have something like very boundaried.
Mm-hmm. Very, I would almost say walled.
Yes, that's right. That's right. It would have to be. And
Mm-hmm.
so is that actually the marriage that you want?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's
Yeah.
possible, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That's not what I would want.
Yeah, and I think some people do make that choice. I always
Hmm.
want them to make it in full awareness, right?
Totally.
But I think the
Absolutely.
idea
Yep.
that you can kind of sit in really unhealthy soup and not get any of it on you is not
Exactly.
true,
Yes.
right? We're
Yes.
unaware of how much things impact us when we're in them, I think.
Hmm. Yes. And there's this mythology, say, back to like 12-step work, right? Into like Al-Anon, which is the Al-Anon sets the tone for the relationship. And I frankly don't, I think the addict, the alcoholic, right, they tend to set the tone for the relationships, much to your point about the soup, right? Like, a relationship, it can only be as healthy as the people that are in it.
I don't know who this definition is from, and my brain cannot figure it out right now.
Okay.
But there's a definition of, or the relationship is the thing that two people create between them.
Mm-hmm.
And to
Right.
that is, it isn't like one person sets the tone for the relationship.
Right.
It's really both people co-creating something,
That's right.
and both of you are in the mix. That's how it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that you can kind of sit outside of that equation is just not true.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that quote, just to bring it back to what that quote
Mhm.
is that's sort of what I was, and this is my specific situation. I was in a very emotionally abusive marriage. I did not know, and I actually didn't, I didn't write too much about this, I don't think, in the book. What I didn't know at the time was that my husband was a sex addict
Mhm.
and was cheating on me for the entire 10 years we were together. And in like epic ways. And the only reason I know that is because he continued to do so in his second marriage
Mhm.
and all throughout every relationship he had after me. And I knew that he had done it before me. And after a certain point, I sort of put the pieces together. But then in particular, watching him in his second marriage, I put all the pieces together and realized how bad it was. And I didn't know because we didn't have texting and iMessaging and, things downloading from one device to the other. We didn't have the
Yeah.
cloud, like all of that,
Right.
right? And so I was in a relationship with somebody who was, pretending to be working on the relationship and couples therapy and all of it, but he wasn't, and that's my story, right? And so I just want to sort of say to people who are maybe not in something quite so toxic, or who are maybe not in, right, that is just my story, right? And the toxicity of the marriage became, who I was. And also because I was like so codependent, so trying so hard to change him and make him love me,
Mhm.
right? And that came from my childhood and my trauma
Yeah.
and all of that. So
Mhm. Okay,
yeah.
great. Well, so let me ask you this. You
Mhm.
have this, you talk about the fine marriage,
Yeah.
you know, and I
Yeah.
wanted you to talk about that a little bit in terms of what is the fine marriage and what's your take on what's happening there for people?
Yeah. Well, again, I think it's really complex, right? I hear a lot of people that come to me like, he's fine. I just don't really love him anymore.
Mhm.
Um, he's a really great guy. I just don't feel it. And sometimes when I dig a little deeper, I mean, if I had a dollar for every time someone in my Facebook group or, in my coaching program said, he's a really great guy. He just has rage issues. Or he's a really great dad, but he abuses me.
Mhm.
Right. And I have to sort of unravel like, sweetie, like a great dad doesn't abuse the mother of their children.
Mhm.
Right. That's not a great dad. I'm glad that he plays with the kids and that he puts them to bed and does things that are really like the very basics, which, the very basics have become a very high bar in our culture for certainly for fathers. But that's actually a very low bar, right? And so I push back about the definition of a great guy or a great dad because I do think that bar has become so low.
Mhm.
So I think there are two paths that I start with, okay, what is your definition? What does that mean?
Mhm.
Right. And if the definition is like, yeah, he's a great guy. He does everything. He does everything right. I'm just bored.
Mhm.
Then we have to talk about you,
Mhm.
right? Why are you bored? Is this just, is this your trauma? Are you used to, turbulence? Does turbulence make you comfortable? Does this, you know, healthy relationship just feel boring because it doesn't have like the drama, because it's actually stable,
Mhm.
right? Or are you really just not, it's just not the, he's not the guy for you. He's a great guy. He's just not the guy for you.
Mhm.
Right. And I think there's a lot of work in between those two things, right? Like, because it's okay. Like, if he's actually not the guy for you, you get to choose. You get to, because first of all, if he's a great guy, but you are not in love with him anymore and you just don't feel that, and he's just not the guy for you, oh my God, please let him find the person who thinks that he is the greatest, person on the planet, right?
Mhm.
You're keeping him from having someone who really loves him. But most of the time, that's actually not what's happening,
Mhm.
in my experience. And it could just be the people that are coming to me. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you might have
Well,
a different take on that.
let me ask you this. Like, what do you think for those folks who are coming and saying, he's a great guy, he's a great dad, but he abuses me, like that. Let's take that example.
Yeah.
What do you think is happening for those folks in terms of how they're looking at their relationship and not letting themselves see what's going on there? Like, what do you think are the issues that
Mhm.
particularly women are getting
Yeah.
stuck in there?
Well, I mean, I think, again, these bars are so low. There's all this cultural, societal, patriarchal stuff. This, like, talk about the soup,
Mhm.
right? Like, we are all in this. We can't not be affected.
Mhm.
And so I think that we're so used to the bar being so low that,
And can I ask you, is it the bar on
yeah.
marriage or is it the bar on men? What's the bar?
I think both, but in particular, men and how they show up in relationships. I mean, oh my God, look at what we do in our relationships, right? I mean, first of all, we start off our relationships with all of this, we use our nurturing and our caretaking as currency. We try to help them, we try to save them, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
And men, by and large, are just not investing quite that much in
Mhm.
the relationships that they're in because they don't have to. Um, Either they don't think that they have to, or they've been told that they don't have to, right? Our culture teaches them that they don't have to. So I do think that the bar is pretty low for men. Um, and marriage, like, we are also taught that marriage is that is the brass ring,
Yeah.
right? From our earliest days. And I think we're shifting this. I love that we're shifting this. These are not the fairy tales we're telling our children these days.
Mm.
But if you're, anywhere on the Gen X spectrum,
Mm. Yep.
that's what we were raised with.
We're raised on
So,
that.
right? So I do think that there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of like, well, I'm focusing on the brass ring. I know I just wanted the ring.
Mhm.
I literally was focused on the ring.
Mm.
That was it. And I mean, to the point where I would be on the subway and I would see women, and if they had a ring on, oh my God, they had it. They had it all, right?
Wow.
Like, and
Wow.
that
Okay.
was, I
Interesting.
mean, like,
Yeah.
really, right?
Mhm.
And I don't even think I. I mean, I know that I did, I was in love with my husband. I was, I don't know if it was love. I don't know if I would categorize. I was, I mean, definitely fell in love with him, but I also think I was, I wasn't in love with the person that I thought he wasn't the person I thought he was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I fell in love with who he was in the beginning. And this is the cycle that I think so many of us get into, where, especially if we are in relationships with narcissists or abusers or anything on that spectrum, that, there's the person that we fall in love with, which is the person that they pretend to be in the beginning. And
Mhm.
then they take that away. And we're just like, wait a minute, no, but we just have to get to that. We just have to get back there. We just have to get
Look
back
at
there.
that.
We just have,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Just get back to that. Cause that's the real relationship. All this other stuff is just like, these are just issues and problems we have to sort out. But this is the real relationship. And it takes a long time before you realize, like, oh no, actually, this is the real relationship. The abuse, the
Okay.
criticism.
Okay. So let me ask you this. I'm kind of
Yeah.
going off.
I know we're going all over
I
the
want to go
place.
back though to what you said, because I think it's interesting. Like, why do you think the bar is so low?
Mm.
Why do you think we have set the bar so low on men or relationships? And like, what is that about? What's your take on that?
Uh, Patriarchy. We raise men
Mm.
to believe, or we have historically raised, and I think it's shifting, thank God. Um, we raise men to believe that they are just sort of entitled, right? They don't actually have to work for much.
Mm.
We have the gender pay gap. We have, there's that great saying that, oh, for the confidence of a mediocre white man,
Mhm.
right? Like that's,
Mhm.
um, and we have I think we've been raised to believe that relationship work is for women, that, men hold all the power. Historically, they hold all the money, they hold the land, they have, right? And I think that still is seeped into sort of the bedrock of our culture. We have not taught men historically, again, to do the work that we do. And this is why we're having this huge, they're calling it the great divorce, right? That I think women have been forced to reckon with our trauma.
Mhm.
And I kind of think if we could take the Me Too movement as a bit of a pinpoint of part of this shift,
Mhm.
um, we were all suffering in a lot of silence for a long time. When I was going through what I was going through, there was no name for any of this. Um,
Mhm.
our couples therapist diagnosed my husband as a narcissist, and he was like, go and do some research about what narcissism is. Right. And like, he was like, well, all I could find is stuff on narcissistic personality disorder. And I know I don't have that, which he doesn't. But like, and then that was the end of the conversation. Right. And also like, like that's going to do it. Go and research
Okay,
narcissism.
that is not
Okay.
helpful. Yeah, yeah.
It's like really not how it works. But I didn't have access to information about abuse, about all of the things that we now understand, like betrayal trauma. Like we did not
Mhm.
have this information back in 2007 and 8. And so women have been reckoning with our trauma.
Mhm.
We've surfaced it, we've talked about it. Again, the Me Too movement, like, oh, like that was an insane moment in history
Mhm.
for the number of women coming out of the shadows and coming out of our isolation and our silent despair and thinking it was all us,
Mhm.
right? And once we realized that we weren't the problem, we went into our healing, right? And unfortunately, I think men are really very far behind, like 20, 30 years behind us in this healing. And that's partly because the patriarchy tells men that like their emotions aren't real. They shouldn't, man up.
Mhm.
The worst thing they can be is like, a girl or gay, right?
Mhm.
So they have a soft feeling and they're either, a pussy or, you know, some gay slur, right? So like how are they supposed to reckon with this? So it's not good for them, right? They are toxifying in their own soup.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I always say the system is bad for everybody,
Yes,
right? It's hurting
absolutely.
everybody. And I think what you're talking about, the language that I always use for it is outsourcing the emotional management
Yes,
piece. And I think men are taught to outsource that to women,
right.
the relational management and the emotional management in the relationship
That's right.
versus because they haven't been taught the skills of how to do it themselves.
That's
And so
right.
they're depending
Absolutely.
on others to do it for them. And women keep picking up the bucket and saying, okay, we're going to carry it
That's right.
instead
And
of asking
I
for
think,
something else.
I think more and more we're opting
Mm.
out. And this is, I think, creating, we're seeing it, this mental health crisis in men, because the more we opt out, right? I mean, men, they remarry very quickly,
Mhm.
right? I mean, for anyone listening who may or may not be getting, going through this or getting divorced, I want you to know right now that they will likely repartner very quickly, and it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with their inability to actually survive on their own.
I think
Right?
yes, there's research on this, right? And so,
Right.
yes.
Yeah.
And so what I hear you saying is women are opting out of doing that emotional management piece.
Hmm. Hmm.
And because the system has been that women do this for men, it leaves men also kind of scrambling to figure out what do I do when this isn't being done for
Right.
me.
Yes,
So it is disrupting the whole system.
it is. And again, I this is bad for men because they don't have the tools, right? And so when they don't have the emotional bandwidth to support their own humanity,
Mhm.
very often, a few things happen. They have higher rates of, heart disease and stress related, disorders. They get violent,
Mhm.
they repartner, or
Mhm.
they, totally melt down.
Mhm.
They go deeper into alcoholism, addiction. They're just
Addiction.
higher rates of
Mhm.
all of these things for men. And it's terrible, terrible.
Yeah, it's not serving any of us, and it's certainly
No.
not serving our relationships in the way that we need it
Mm-mm.
to be.
Yeah.
So, coming back and thinking about women in these relationships, we kind of talked about the fine marriage.
Hmm.
Talk
Hmm.
about for a minute about kind of going down the continuum toward the more abusive relationship.
Yes.
How do you
Yeah.
know? How do you tell your clients, here's how you know that you're dealing with emotional abuse in your relationship? How do you know that you're in an abusive relationship?
Well, I think mainly what I want women to look at is, we are so trained, especially if we're in an abusive relationship, we're kind of trained to keep our eye on them and, their mood and their, am I doing something wrong, right? You're walking on eggshells. But while walking on eggshells, you're focused on them. And what I want you to do is focus on how you feel in this relationship.
Mm,
Do you feel supported? Do you feel, um, respected and honored? Do you feel like you're an equal partner? Do you feel like your partner likes you? You
mm,
know,
mhm,
are you constantly being criticized? It is nobody's, like, we should never be in a relationship with someone who is criticizing you. I
mhm,
mean, criticism is one of, Gottman's four horsemen of the relationship apocalypse, right? Like, criticism is terrible.
mhm.
Contempt. Are you being treated with contempt? Do you feel like they just don't like you?
Yeah.
Like they just, everything you do is wrong. Do you feel like you can never do anything right? Is it black and white? Is it their world and you're just trying to fit into it? And if those, if the answers to those are like, yeah, that's how I feel, that is, um, that is probably an abusive relationship. And the hardest thing for us to do is to recognize that the relationship is abusive and then take the appropriate action for that. Because what we want to do is explain it to them. We want to go, and this is what I did. Oh my God, look, it's like textbook. You're abusing me. This
Mhm.
is abuse. Don't you understand? So that they'll stop. Because if you love me, surely you don't want to be abusing me.
Don't you also think that this is what I think, you tell me, but
Mm-hmm.
I think also sometimes we're looking for the label of abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we are looking for it to be there because then it legitimizes how we feel in the relationship.
Absolutely.
But also, you could be in a relationship that is not abusive,
Mm-hmm.
but where you still feel like you are sort of always um, in the other person's world. You're over functioning in the relationship, you're over giving in the relationship,
Mm-hmm.
you can still be in a relationship that doesn't feel good.
Right.
And sometimes I think we're looking for the word abuse to validate that we
Mm,
feel good in the relationship instead of trusting it.
yeah. Right. And I think I mean, it's a really interesting point, Michelle, because I do think that if we are over functioning in the relationship, if we're carrying the load if it feels just imbalanced and there's not criticism, contempt, and it's not coming from them, but it's coming from you, then that's your work, right? And in a healthy relationship, you would take that to your partner and say, I feel like there is an imbalance of power or even responsibility,
Mhm.
emotional responsibility in this relationship. And it's on me. It's on me. I'm over functioning in this relationship. And I need to do a lot of work on what that's about. In a healthy relationship, your partner goes, oh my God, I don't want that for you.
Mhm.
I'm so sorry. Right? In a healthy relationship, someone says, wow, you know what? I can see how I have been benefiting from X, Y, and Z. It might be hard for them to get there, right? Because it's working for them, by the way,
Mhm.
right? It's like
Yeah.
if something that is an imbalance is working for one person in the relationship, it might be hard for them to want to shift it. But if it's not working in a healthy relationship, if something is not working for one person in the relationship, it's not working for the relationship.
Mhm.
And both parties will want to make the relationship work for both people,
Mhm.
right? Because that's the co-creating part, right? And it may be hard for them to be like, oh, shit, that really works for me. But if it's not working for you, let's figure this out together because
Mhm.
we are co-creating this, right? But if you go to a partner and say, you know what, I feel like this thing is happening and I'm not, and it's on me,
Mhm.
but I need to change it. And your partner's like, works for me. I don't know what your problem is. Then that's not a healthy relationship,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah. And it makes absolute sense. And I think you can also kind of trust your own reading of that and trust your
Uh-huh.
around it.
And that's like that catch 22, right? Is that and I start my book with this inner work, right? That when we are in a relationship in which we are over giving, over manage, like all of the emotional labor and carrying the mental load and all of that stuff. Um, it's really, we lose our sense of self. We
Mhm.
lose who we are. And the first thing we have to do is reconnect with that sense of self so we actually can connect with our intuition. Because if we've been in this relationship for any length of time, it's been a steady process of denying our intuition.
Yeah. I talk about de-selfing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Learning how to
Mm-hmm.
de-self often and coming out of that pattern back to actually touching base with yourself and figuring out who you are and what you think.
That's right. Absolutely. And that's really hard
Mhm.
when the relationship has required consistent deselfing,
Mhm.
right? And so if you're in a relationship where you can verbalize that and say, like, I feel like I have been deselfing and I need to reconnect with self, you know, I want a partner who's going to go, oh my God, what do we need to do? What do we need therapy? Do you need a retreat? Do you need what do we need to do? I want you to have complete autonomy and connection with self. How can I help?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think even just giving that example for some people is going to make them go, okay, that is not what's happening for me. And so I think sometimes it's really good to give those examples of what it looks like in a healthy relationship, you know?
Absolutely. And again, it also might be confronting for the other person,
Mhm.
right? It also might be like, oh, well, you've been carrying the emotional labor and the mental load, and this means I'm going to have to work harder. And there might be resistance to that. But there's a difference between like, oh, I'm going to have to take this to my therapist and sort my feelings out about this because it feels really confronting to me.
Yeah.
And that sounds like a you problem,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, those are different answers.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you for your readers of the book, for the
Mm-hmm.
women that are somewhere along the continuum in dealing with divorce,
Yeah.
if you were going to give them like the top three things that you would want for them, what would those things be?
I want women to be happy.
Okay.
Like, I really do. We deserve it. Like, we deserve to be happy, And you know, I think if you look at I mean, certainly for me, like I'm in like moms groups, right? Women are not happy. We're just not.
Mhm.
Um, and by and large, their relationships are exhausting them, right? And so I really do want women to be happy, and we have to search out what our definition of that is and all of that stuff, right? But it really does start with that self-work.
Mhm.
And I know it feels like a trite answer, but actually underneath it is a lot of weight.
Mhm.
Um, uh, I want I want women to know that they have autonomy and choice, right? I want women to know that the ring isn't the brass ring, the diamond ring, like it's not everything.
Mhm.
Um, Women will say to me often, but like, what if I'm alone forever? And I say, and so what? And so what? What if you're alone forever? I am, 15 years out. I haven't dated in like 7 years. I'm happy. I have a really full and fulfilled life. I will, uh, oh, I've dated, but I haven't been in a relationship. Um, I have a really fulfilled and rich life. I would love to be partnered. That would be awesome, but I am absolutely not settling
Mhm.
for less than. So, partnership is not the be all end all. Like, we are worth so much more. How much energy do we expend trying to fit into these molds, whether they're cultural, diet culture, how many diet, we're in the new year, how many more diets are we starting? How many, right? Imagine all of that energy just funneled on yourself. And so I want women to know, people will come to me and they say, like, what if I'm alone forever?
Mhm.
And my response to that is like, what if you are?
Mhm.
That has to not be the worst thing in the world.
Mhm.
Marriage and partnership, while wonderful, and listen, we are humans. We thrive and crave connection, right? That's sort of innate to who we are. Um, but we also have to look at what connection is. Like, I very often we are settling for something way less than true and authentic connection because it's there, right? It's better than not. And I have been, divorced for about 15 years, and I have not been in a relationship for about close to 7, I think. And I'm great. I'm great. Being partnered is not the be all end all. I would love it, but I'm certainly not going to settle for it. So I want women to know that.
And can I add too? I always think the
Mhm.
languaging is interesting of what if I'm alone
Mhm.
versus what if I'm unpartnered?
Mhm.
Because
Yes,
being alone and not having a partner are two incredibly different states of being.
absolutely.
And I think that's really important for people to put their heads around too,
That's
because
right.
you could be unpartnered but have an incredibly rich world and
Mhm.
relationships and all of that kind of thing. So,
You're absolutely right. People are always astonished. They're like, you have so many friends. You have like, I have like I have hundreds of people who, I mean, I have lots of very close friends, but I also have like hundreds of people that would like do anything. Like, I need something, like I had just had surgery. I have meal trains. I have stuff showing up at my house every day, people showing up with food, with company, right? Like, I'm not afraid to ask for help and people show up. And so I think that's a really great distinction,
yeah,
right? I am not alone.
to be happy and to know that you have choice, I think are two big, big, big pieces, and they're linked, right? Because you get
Mhm.
to the happiness through exercising your choice.
Yeah, right.
So
And
there's,
I think I also want women to know that I want women to know what intimacy looks and feels like, right? And often that starts in our friendships. Often it starts with a therapist, right? And then moves into, right? But I want women to know what true intimacy and actually looks like and feels like so that they can understand what partnership should look and feel like.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. And some people aren't experiencing that anywhere, not just in their
Right.
partnered relationship, but also in their friendships and their family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There were two things. Can I
Yeah.
spout on this for a second?
Yeah.
There were two things that I did just before getting divorced that were sort of catalysts to my divorce. One of them was, and again, this is many, many years ago. It was when Sheila Kelly first started S Factor, which was the pole dancing studios, and they became, pole dancing became, like competitive sport and all sorts of stuff. But Sheila Kelly's S Factor started out with, there were no mirrors,
Mm.
there was only candlelight,
Mm.
and it was women connecting with their bodies
Mm.
and their sensuality. It was not even sexuality, it was sensuality in this, it was almost like taking back the pole, right?
Mhm.
And it all started with floor work. Your eyes were closed, nobody was watching you. It was just this deep connection with your own sensuality. And the longer I did that work,
Mm.
the more incongruous it felt to my marriage. I felt like I was developing this sense of myself that I couldn't bring home.
Interesting.
And then the other thing I was doing was kickboxing.
Mm.
And again, it created this sort of rageful power in me. I started to realize how angry I was as I was doing it. As I'm like punching the bag, I'm like, oh, there's something happening here. And the more of that power I felt, it also felt incongruous to who I was in my marriage.
Mm.
And as those two pieces of me started to grow, both the softness and the fierceness, I was outgrowing who I could be in my marriage. And that's terrifying, right? And I think a lot of women may shy away from doing a lot of, intimate work on themselves because it does, like, if doing any form of personal development work makes you feel like you're going to outgrow your marriage, well, like that's actually important information.
Here's, can I just,
And yeah,
can I-
yeah,
one of the things I think is super interesting, and we could probably do another whole 30 minutes on this, but we're going to have to wrap here in a minute. But
yeah.
about those two things is they're both so highly embodied.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so to me, what I'm hearing you say is
Exactly.
I got in my body in
Yes.
different ways and came out of this place where I was just in my head and not in my being.
Yep.
And then I understood my relationship differently.
Thank you.
And
That's so
that
well
is
said.
huge.
Yep.
That is
So
huge.
well said. That's right. That's right. And up until that point, I called myself a head on legs.
Yeah.
I had no connection
Hmm.
to myself, my being, my body, my spirit, nothing.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. But thank you. Thank you
Oh my
so
God,
much
thank
for the
you.
time. I would encourage you all to get the book, read the book. Uh, Kate does an amazing job of really diving into a lot of complex issues that come up for people who are thinking about divorce. So I encourage you to get it and read it.
Thank you so
And thank
much,
you.
Michelle.
Thanks for being here with us today.
Oh my God, thank you for having me. I love it. I love talking to you. And